Okay, so yes, please give me a one-word summary. 1 to 2 words that would describe paragraph 1. Yeah, collaboration. So why is that important? And that's if we get asked about that, we can go back to paragraph 1. Okay, let's continue with paragraph 2. And we're talking about the conversations with other writers and artists. And he mentions other plays by John. And we get asked about this as well. Anything else? And we know that Shakespeare's and Fletcher's 2 plays were performed together. Okay, so how can we summarize this up? Paragraph 2, so we have some examples um, of collaboration. Okay, what about paragraph 3? So let me know what you guys think is important. The last sentence, okay. Yep. So this was the Ben's play was clearly a response to Shakespeare's other play, and we're giving other examples of Thomas as well. Okay, great. Does anyone have a summary ready for paragraph 3? Okay, I will write that name in case we're asked about it. Okay, and lost version of a collaboration. Okay, paragraph 4. So Shakespeare was and is bound to many kinds of artists. And we get to talking about why he created his characters. So that was important. We saw that in a question, so I would definitely highlight something like that. And yep, the joint stock company, legally bound, and created his characters who would collaborate with him in performing the play. Each actor received a separate manuscript called a part. And each actor owned his character. So the actors are working together with Shakespeare. So how can we say that in our summary? Yeah, so we talk about the relationship to the actor. Great. Okay, and that's just short for a relationship. So when you're making these summaries, they just have to make sense to you. Don't waste your time writing super long words. Okay, moving on, paragraph 5. So those actors embody Shakespeare's characters, and we have a comparison with modern plays. Shakespeare says nothing about the visual impression. But when we have an actor, we tend to think of that character in that actor's body. So how can we describe this paragraph in the summary? And let me know what you guys highlighted. Okay, physique and face. And once we see the actor's face, modern playwrights often anticipate or imagine that actor. Okay. Think of the character in that actor's body. Yep. That's great. So how can we write that in a few words? So I'll just write actor description. Okay, last paragraph. So it's important to note that all his plays were written to be co-created by a team. The team changes, the actors change, acting companies are changing too, and entertainment goes through a chaotic period. Shakespeare could never have expected a play to be performed by exactly the same cast. Even if actors helped Shakespeare create characters, he had to recreate them for new actors. So that's kind of telling you the main actor Shakespeare relationship and with characters. Okay, so does anyone have a summary? Yeah, so this paragraph's more telling about the transition and yeah, how actors come and go. So I would kind of write about the change with actors. Okay, so now that we're done, we can just see how this passage flows. In the beginning, we talked about how Shakespeare collaborated, and then we were given an example and other specific examples. And then the author goes into the relationship with an actor and describes the actors. And then he talks about how these actors and characters have changed. So looking at the question now, which of the following is the most reasonable inference that can be drawn from the information of the passage? What did you guys say for 6? Okay, so great works of art are not necessarily the work of a single genius. To make a work of art requires a relationship between an artist and audience. So we didn't talk about any audience really. So that would eliminate that. Oops. How do I? Okay, there we go. Those who believe that humans can succeed on their own are wrong. That is clearly out of scope of this passage. And working together decreases the workload. We did not talk about workload. So A would be the best answer here. And yes, what was your question on the highlighting and summary?
Because you were kind of interacting with the student, so I'm not sure. Like when you read the passage, are you first scan through the question and then as you see the important highlight, and then you just keep reading until you finish whole paragraph, then writing the keyword, or what did you do? Because I feel if you highlight and writing the summary of the paragraph is a little bit interruptive, like interrupt the flow.
Okay. Yeah, it does, but it's easier than going back to the whole passage at the end and then thinking about what the summary was for like paragraph 1. So what I do is I read, and if I see anything important, I highlight. And after reading that paragraph, I take 2 to 3, I don't know how long it takes, but a couple of seconds to write down that summary word, and then I keep reading. And sometimes I'm even doing it with practice. I just write and I keep reading, but it doesn't really interrupt my flow, and it helps me just because it saves me time from rereading the whole passage or even a paragraph or 2. So I think it comes better with practice.
When you write down the summary, do you write the like by every 3 sentences, or like you write after each in the end of each paragraph?
Yeah, so at the end of each paragraph, we were doing the writing of the summary. So it depends on what works for you. Do you like to read and like what works for your focus, you know? For me, I read really fast. So I'm able to read and highlight and then write, and then go back to the passage, read, highlight, write a paragraph summary. But you have to figure out what your style of reading is. So that's why CARS is really, there's not a rule, you know, so you kind of have to play and figure out what works for you. But we can definitely talk afterwards, and that might be more helpful. So with this question, the author is concerned that readers of Shakespeare complete works. So that was in the beginning. So what did you guys think about this question? Okay, so he's concerned that readers of Shakespeare complete works will misunderstand the nature of Shakespeare collaborations. Okay. Might not be aware that Shakespeare did not always work alone. Will believe that playwrights are more important than actors. So that is out of scope. So we can eliminate that. Could come away with the false sense of Shakespeare greatness. We didn't really address greatness or anything like that. So that's another thing to cross off. So going between A and B. And B would be better because it is addressing the collaborations they might not be aware. So going back here, most readers might not catch that most of the important playwrights were his collaborators. So that is exactly what B is saying. Does that make sense? Okay, perfect. Moving on, number 4. Why does the author explain in the last paragraph that he revises his characters? What did you guys think of this? D, okay. So was it because he wanted to find better actors? No. He was eager to collaborate with new talent. We'll keep that, okay. He was unable to keep the actors he wanted to work with. No, there was nothing mentioned like that. And understood how theater industry worked. Yeah, that sounds relative to what the paragraph was about. We're talking about the theater industry, how the industry is changing a lot, and how Shakespeare he never expected that a play would be just performed by exactly the same cast, because the actors are going to change and he's going to have to create new he's going to have to create new actors and characters for those plays. So that is why he would revise his characters, because if he understood why the theater industry worked like that, because that would make sense why he revised his characters. And what was that comment? After such an apprenticeship, never had expected. Yeah, so D would, yeah, he was in the industry. He would have understood to not have expectations. Great, yeah, that's a great explanation. So D is the best answer here because in this last paragraph, we kind of have a summary of how the industry and theater is working and changing, and a lot of trial and error. And it's not because he's eager to collaborate with new talent. This is not really mentioned in there. So that's why D would be the best answer. It might not make the most sense, but just based on these answer choices, that's why D would work best. Yep, so if you're still confused, do process of elimination. Okay, number 3. So why were these performed together? Yeah, so these were mentioned together at one point. Why? So this was in the second paragraph where we read about the Taming of the Shrew and Fletcher's play as well. Yeah, so C would be the best answer because this was the example of how Shakespeare worked with other playwrights such as John Fletcher. Did anyone have any other choices here? I think it's pretty clear it was not because he had a strong relationship with the playwright community or his collaborators disliked him or how much he contributed. So C would be the best answer. Okay, what about 2 Roman numerals? Okay, so he was in a financial and contractual relationship with them. Yeah, so they collaborated together and that is something that was part of it. So 1 is true. So anything that doesn't have 1, we can cross off. Okay, 2. Many of his actors were also famous playwrights at the time. So that doesn't necessarily explain why he worked closely. So that's something we can cross off. Okay, lastly, that just leaves 1 and 3. So those actors determined how Shakespeare characters looked. And yes, that was something that was mentioned in the actor's description and the relationship with actors, that each actor owned his character, they created them with Shakespeare, right here. Okay, number 2. Or number 1. Oh, did I skip number 2? Oh, that was number 2. What do you guys think for number 1? Yeah, so if you're working together with the chefs and the chefs help decide, that is kind of the analogy to how Shakespeare did his company. Okay, does anyone have any questions about any of the passage or anything we highlighted or talked about before we move on to the next passage? So as you can see, this passage was a little bit boring and difficult, but the questions were all right. So sometimes that happens where they give you a boring passage or something that's really long, but then the questions are okay. And then sometimes the passage is super easy to read, super easy to understand, and the questions are so tricky. That happens a lot. So just beware of those. And if not, we can move on and I'll give you 9 minutes to do the next passage. So let me know when you guys are ready to start that and I will start the timer. Okay, you guys can start. Let me know once you're done in the chat, or if you need another minute. Okay, how did you guys think of this passage? Better than the previous one? Okay. Yeah, it seemed a little bit more interesting. Okay, how were the questions? Okay, that's great. Cool. I did some highlighting just to save time, but I'd like for you guys to tell me the summary so we can get some more practice. So paragraph 1, what would be a good summary? So please try to participate so we can all get some practice. Yeah, so the author was talking more about how cultures were their own and unique, and how many people believe that. And okay, great. Bound by culture, identity. Okay. Paragraph 2. So the author specifically mentions I wish to examine and how we are understanding ethnicity, how ethnic groups define themselves. He also mentions a specific word. So what would be a good summary for paragraph 2? Yeah, so we're looking at ethnicity now. Okay, paragraph 3. And stop me if you guys have any confusions reading or if you came across anything that didn't make sense. So paragraph 3. So he's kind of drawing distinctions between cultural and ethnic boundaries. So we can definitely say cultural versus ethnic. Yep. Paragraph 4. So he gave more specific examples of the cultural boundary. Yeah, so I would say like an example of the, I'm just gonna say cultural boundary right there. Paragraph 5. So now he's saying they are closely connected. Yeah, so the influence on each other. Okay, last paragraph. Yeah, so definitely a key thing in this last paragraph was the cultural pollution, because we see that also came up in the question. So yeah, we can definitely write pollution and the appropriation. Okay, are there any questions in understanding the passage before we move on to the questions? How are the questions for you guys? Okay, and I end up starting from the last just because I read through the questions first. And these are just my strategies, but do what works for you. Okay. So what did you guys think about number 6? So he was going to advise the government. There's ethnic conflict. How would we stabilize them? Okay, I'm seeing some Ds. Draw attention to how the ethnic groups behave similarly and downplay the differences. Okay, yeah, that seems like a good choice. Okay, let's look at the other ones. Um, and promote the national identity by moving ethnic groups away from their traditional regions. That is not what would be what the author would suggest in terms of ethnic conflict and legislation to keep people from foreign countries from immigrating. No, we also did not. That was not something the author mentioned that was a good thing. Setting up a program to highlight the various positive attributes. Okay. So here, the author talks more about the similarity and to downplay the behavioral differences. So that's why D would be better than A. Where in the, okay, can you find where they talk about similarity? Right, so, so he was saying that ethnic and cultural, they're similar and they're obviously connected. Um, and by ethnic, he means distinctions between a group members, and whereas the cultural differences are creating the appearance of ethnic differences. And here in the last paragraph, he was talking about the way the cultural differences create these differences. They're robbing one's culture. That's what people think. So that's why the other choices are crossed out. Does that kind of make more sense? Let me know. Because he doesn't suggest like people should believe that it's the various positive attributes. But the passage focuses on the differences. So we said cultural versus ethnic. So we would want to see how that works out. Because he's saying the cultural differences are what causes the ethnic differences. Okay, does that make sense? Sorry about that. Yeah, well, the author would probably recommend. So it's not directly in the passage, but suppose. So this is definitely an inference type question. Does that make sense? Let me know if we can move on. Okay, perfect. Okay, which differences is least like a cultural difference as described in the passage? Yeah, so here we were talking about, we talked about restaurant cuisines. We even talked about dressing, so that would be team uniforms. And holiday traditions is definitely something like a practice or um, that is definitely a cultural difference. So company names is least likely to be a cultural difference. Okay, moving on. Which statement would the author agree with? Okay. D, people are for the most part the same. Okay. Let's take a look at the other choices as well. National boundaries should be abolished. That is definitely something we can eliminate. We should welcome contact with others. So the author wasn't really super positive saying that uh, we should go out of our way and welcome contact with others. So that is also something out of scope. So between C and D, so people are for the most part the same. The author was talking about differences and cultural differences and ethnic differences. So D would not be the best answer here because C, what we do can determine who we are. This kind of suggests that cultural differences account for who we are. Who we are is the ethnic part, and then the cultural differences are responsible for creating that appearance. So what we do can determine who we are is kind of what that is saying. Let me know if that makes sense. We didn't really say that they're the same. So that would be too much of a out of scope inference.
I put C because they talking about the ethnicity is defined by the the livelihood, language, cuisine, and music, and we are also defined by the ethnicity, which is what being inferred in the first half of the passage. So
Right,
that
yeah, thank you. Sorry, you can go ahead. Okay. Does that make sense before we move on to number 3? Okay. Number 3. So the difference in color. Yep. So, okay, so let's see. So, well, if it's one of these, we can eliminate these. So let's see, is it ethnic or cultural? So going back to the passage, um, where do we define if it's cultural or ethnic? So the practices and symbols of a cultural group, the dressing, the language, music, that is cultural. And then ethnic would be um, how they are. So that would be an example of skin color. So skin color would be an ethnic difference, because in paragraph 3, we talk about the actual people. So the kinds of work that they do, those are cultural, and the actual people themselves, the differences between distinctions drawn, those are ethnic differences. Does that make sense? Okay, perfect. Number 2. What did you guys get for number 2? Yeah, so this is a cultural pollution we mentioned in the last paragraph, where he was talking about people think that other people are robbing their culture. So definitely something along those lines where people think their culture is not improved by other cultures, that would be a good choice. And we can't really make the distinction that people worry more about one or the other. We also can't say that if they're not actually polluted, and we didn't talk about culture being an artificial construct. So C would be the best answer. Okay, number 1. So people who share the same cultural practices still segregate themselves into ethnic groups. Does this support the author's argument? So the author's argument was saying culture is what makes the ethnic differences. So if we're saying they have the same culture, but they still have ethnic differences, that is going to weaken the argument of saying culture is what is primarily responsible for creating ethnic differences. That goes directly against what the author was saying. Do you guys have any questions on any of these? Any questions on what we did today or what else to do in cars? So definitely keep practicing. I would definitely recommend doing a couple passages a day, back to back, so you can build up your stamina and find some strategies that work for you and see if your score improves. And if not, don't do that strategy. Do what works best for you. Cars is definitely definitely more personal. So find what strategy works for you. If you want to highlight, if you want to write, if you want to read the questions, does that work for you? Figure that out first and then start practicing a lot more. I don't, when are we supposed to do exam cards? So those are third-party passages. You can do them whenever you want. You don't have to save them like the double AMC material. You should do those last, but any third-party passages like Jack Weston, Khan Academy, Princeton Review, Exam Crackers, you can do those whenever. And yeah, I don't have anything else, I think. So we are all good. If you enjoyed this session, please help out and donate to MCAT 101. But I'll see you guys next time, and let me know if there's any other questions, or please email me at mcat101questions@gmail.com with any questions you might have. Okay, take care, guys.